All right, so we are on a roll here, and we're really figuring some of this stuff out and learning the intricacies and nuances of the different tags and where we might use them. And this is all informative. And just by you watching this, you are rolling around in this content, which means the more you roll around in it, the more it's going to stick. And by the time we've kind of gone through all this, you'll be able to say, oh yeah, article section, what's the difference? Articles need to stand on their own. And so we're going to look at the differences between articles and sections in more depth in this video. But I just want to take a moment to say I'm sorry that sometimes I talk fast. I know that that's maybe can sometimes be challenging, particularly if English is not your first language. And that just is the way I get going. I get excited. It just starts going. So I apologize for that, and I hope it's not too big of an issue for you. And there are often ways to slow my voice down in videos. So you could choose, instead of like normal speed, you could slow me down a notch or two. So you might look in the video wherever you're watching this. Is there a way down there in the right corner to change the speed? You might check that out. All right, so article versus section. What's the difference between the two? So we've already mentioned this a couple times, but again, we're going to get it to stick because we're rolling around in it. An article is a self-contained thing. It could stand on its own. And so that's what this says right here. Self-contained composition, independently distributable or reusable. So some examples would be a forum post, a magazine or a newspaper article, a blog entry, or any object, an object, or any other item of content. But the main thing is self-contained, independently distributable, reusable, stands on its own. Articles typically include a heading, H1 through H6. Like, hey, here's the title of the article, right? Like in a newspaper. And some usage notes. When an article element is nested, the inner element represents an article related to the outer element. For example, the comments of a blog post can be article elements nested in the article representing the blog post. So we saw that, in that MDN example. And I think that's where that takes us right here. Yeah, been here a few times already, I reckon. Article. There we go. So we already saw that deal, right? And I really like that trick right there that I just did. Command F to search something on a page, and then article, and it highlights the tag I want to look at, so I can see opening, closing, right there, and then opening, closing, cool, and it starts to make sense. And then author information of an article element can be provided through the address element, but it doesn't apply to nested article elements. So for the main article, if it has nested articles, you don't use address. But for the main article, you could use address. That's kind of interesting. What is address? We could go back to the HTML element. Oh, heck, it was right there. Address, right? But I could also find it, so there it was right there. I could also find it at HTML element reference. And so here is address. And then when I come to address, I could come in here, supplies contact information for the nearest article or body ancestor. In the latter case, applies to the whole document. Contact information. So that's, what I just used the author's name because this was saying here on article, it was saying address, address. We were looking at it in mine. Author information of article element can be provided through address element, but it doesn't apply to the nested. So author information. So I guess that would have, author information would have contact information. Kind of interesting, right? But just looking at the documentation, it's not always clear. I don't know. It's a little bit of a pain point, but you do your best. So usage note, to represent an arbitrary address, one that is not related to the contact information, use a paragraph element rather than an address element. This element should not, so just if you just have a random address, use paragraph. This element should not contain more information than the contact information, like a publication date. And typically an address element can be placed inside a footer element of the current section, if any. So even the documentation can create some confusion. But that's our job. So it's not the best documentation, right? There's some places where it's not completely clear, and even some places where it's a little bit conflicting. So we saw a point of confusion here with address. It's saying here with article, it's saying, hey, use address. Where did that go? use address element, author information, right? You can use the address element. But when we go look at the address element, well, if we don't want to include the contact information, like even here, it says it's for contact information. So does the author information have to include contact information? And when I think about what address means just in and of itself, it's an address, you know? So not totally clear. We can look to see the examples. An address, you can contact the author at, so that's pretty cool. If you see any bugs, please. You may also visit us at this address, right? So maybe if we have the contact information for the author, we'd include it in the address because there's the address. But if we don't have the contact information, then we just include the information about the author at the article in a paragraph or something. That's probably the call I would make right there. So examples help a lot. So that's article, and then here we have a section. So section is a thematic grouping of content. The business section, the world section, the local section, right? So thematic grouping of content typically includes a heading, H1 through H6. Do not use a section element as a generic container. This is what div is for, especially when the sectioning is only for styling purposes. So you wouldn't use a section for, say, I just want to contain this stuff which is unrelated into a chunk right here. You wouldn't use a section for like a group of, well, actually that would work. I was going to say a group of ads, but we have a section with a group of ads, and then each ad is in an aside. So I don't know, right? Where would you use a div? I'm sure that's going to come up, and we'll see examples of it. Let's just say like inside of a section, I needed to take something and make it block level to format it a certain way. Let me wrap it in a div. I don't need another section there. So there's a perfect example. Again, you don't have to grab everything I'm saying, but just in hearing me say it, you are being exposed to these ideas, and they're starting to become familiar. And when I said, hey, a section with a grouping of asides in it for articles, hopefully that was clicking a little bit, right? Well, here we have an aside with a couple of sections. Maybe that would be the better way to do it. I was thinking a section with a couple of asides, but I actually like that better. So you can see how you think about this stuff and start to put it together. All right. So section, we got that. A rule of thumb, you want this content to appear in the outline. So if you want the content to appear in an outline, we use a section. Otherwise, we might stick it inside of a div, right? If something can stand on its own, use the article element. And so why, if we want it to appear in the outline, do we use a section? First, we're creating our sections, then we're going to create our outline. But you have to remember that this deal right here, right, that the section and the article create sections in the outline, right? So they contribute to the outline. They help build the outline. These do right here. So if you don't want it to contribute to the outline, put it in a div maybe. And if you do want it to be part of the outline, put it in a section. Yeah. So that's what that bit mean, right? That's what that bit meant right there. That's hard for me to say for some reason. All right. And here's an MDN example. So let's take a look at that. And section, example. Section, heading, paragraph. Div, heading, some image. Section, heading, some image, right? And so you can see this is like before and after. So cool. That's it for sections. So sections are just a thematic grouping of content. Thematic grouping, heading, and an image. Heading and content, right? Thematic grouping of content. All right. Additional reading, you could read this W3C about articles and sections. And I put that in there, and there's a little bit of interesting information section, and then some code examples. So you could just pause the video right here, and then you do not have to look this up, right? So this highlighted stuff is things I found interesting. So pause, and read. And then I also found that interesting. So pause and read. I'll leave it there for a second, sorry. Okay. And then it might be interesting just to come down here and take a look through those examples of how they're doing stuff. So you get to this document from this link, the easiest way, that link right there. And then there's article versus section versus div. And that's a nice article to read through just to sort of reinforce everything I've just shared. So you might take a look at that. All right, that is the difference between article and section.